روش باش بخير بن بو webinar Aero. Thank you all for joining us today. We have organized 3 back-to-back webinar sessions today with short 15-minute breaks in between. You can use the same Zoom link to rejoin after each break, please. I would like to just make this remark. Please note that these introductory sessions presented by our partners are meant to lay the foundation for future trainings we provide at KAAE. While they provide a general overview, they will help us begin shaping more focused sessions that align closely with the KAAE standards and policies. This will give us a solid starting point for understanding. This is very important for understanding what KAAE standards implementation can look like across our institution in the region. Please enjoy the sessions today. And Terence, please.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. So this slide, I believe this will be recorded. So this is just some legal information we share during our webinar. But again, we've already established that this webinar will be recorded. So thank you. This is our third session, I believe, and it's on mission, strategic planning, and governance. I'm Terence Peavy, and I believe a link was sent for my bio, but I'll just give you a quick overview of who I am and maybe why I'm here. So I have been at Middle States for going on 4 years. My previous experience in higher ed was on a campus, on a few campuses actually, and my specialty was enrollment management. So here in the United States, I live in the New York City metropolitan area, so a number of the institutions that I previously was employed were in the New York metropolitan area, again, kind of centering on the recruitment of students and of course, a lot of strategic planning, because as you all know, enrollment is one of the keystones to strategic planning in terms of managing not only the volume of students, but the quality of students and the persistence in terms of them actually not coming to your school, but also graduating. So as we talk today about these 3 areas, I definitely have kind of a Middle States perspective, and I definitely have a on-the-ground perspective being an administrator at institutions prior to joining Middle States. In terms of submitting questions, please use the Q&A feature that you'll see on the Zoom, and we hope to get to a majority of them, if not all of them, during the session. I may pause to see if there are some questions that are relevant to the items that I'm discussing in the middle of the presentation, but we will have a formal question and answer session towards the latter part of the presentation. I listed here some very broad objectives. I find that when you do presentations like this, you want to start broad, and you're definitely going to kind of zero in on certain elements. But as you can see, there will just be, I think, a takeaway that you'll have is just an understanding of the alignment between mission and strategic planning and governance. We'll talk a little bit about strategic planning from our perspective, not only at Middle States, but again, my professional experience with strategic planning. And then we'll talk about, of course, this is why we're here, how accreditation supports all these elements and in ways that we kind of follow it through our accreditation process. All right, let us start with mission. I think these 3 bullets really speak to mission on a larger level. First, it describes the institution's core purpose and societal role. So it becomes distinctive when it starts with those areas. The landscape of higher education in the United States and around the world is extremely competitive. And I think when you start to look at mission, that's where you start to narrow into the uniqueness of those institutions. When you start to look at the things that are valued by that institution and how the mission drives everything that goes forward at that institution. So of course, being a higher ed institution, balancing teaching, research, and community service. And it could be other things here too, but these are just really, again, just building blocks of just how missions are developed and how they're basically lived by institutions and their various groups. And of course, it informs all policies, programs, and partnerships. And as you can see now, even in the first slide, you can almost see the alignment of just how mission is the foundation and everything emanates from those areas. Because even in the three bullet points that we just discussed, it does speak to the entirety, of a college or university. I thought it'd be interesting to add mission versus vision because sometimes they're used interchangeably and sometimes not in the right way. The great thing about mission is that it really speaks to where you are now. And as you see that column on the left, you see focus, purpose, and role. These are all things that your mission should be driving in its present state. Now, when you actually have a mission, it doesn't mean that you stay kind of in that static state all the time because you're always analyzing, enhancing, and really getting feedback as to whether there are elements that need to be refreshed. And so a vision sometimes does provide you that opportunity to be forward thinking while living in the moment. And so you start to see on that right column under vision, how you're basically looking forward. For focus, it's future aspiration. For purpose, it outlines what we aim to become. And of course, the role inspires long-term direction. So I think having those two pieces juxtaposed just really give you that opportunity to kind of say where we are now and how are we kind of following our mission, but then always thinking forward and of course the continuous improvement and having that vision kind of be this North Star that you're looking at going forward. Now, when we talk about strategic planning, this is something that I think institutions have to be patient and thoughtful about. I think there's a level of realism, but also kind of that vision piece of analyzing where you are now, and of course, aiming higher or having goals that are attainable, and then of course, mixing that with maybe some aspirational aspects. But it is long term, and I think that's one key thing I want to emphasize that most strategic plans take place over a period of time. There's not a right number. I've seen strategic plans that are 3 years. I've seen them 5 years. I do think 10 years is too long, especially in higher ed as it exists now. There's so much happening and changing that you may not want to have that long of an interval to have a strategic plan. But whatever interval you use, it has to be over a period of time because the things that you're most likely outlining as strategic plan goals are things that will take some time. Um, and also, just to really emphasize this, a very important part is that this is an inclusive process. The strategic plans that I see or have experienced, either in my professional career or working for middle states, involve the community. The community can be defined in different ways, but some of the core groups within the community are administrators, faculty, students, alumni, the board of trustees, or whatever governing body you have, but it's all inclusive and maybe even some stakeholders within your community. Here in the United States, we have what are called two-year institutions or community colleges. They have a very strong tie to the community, in most cases to the local government, because they're focused on workforce development. So they want to be in lockstep with the government in terms of what are some of the labor needs that you need and how do we kind of reflect that in our curriculum. This doesn't mean that four-year institutions or private institutions don't do that as well, but in just my experience, I see a very strong line between the local community and government and their needs to a lot of strategic plans that happen on the two-year side. And third, when we talk about strategic planning, I kind of led off with this, that they have to be goals that are with measurable outcomes and resources. So whatever you decide when you are going through your strategic planning, you have to come up with outcomes, but you also have to resource it. These things involve some level of resource. I think the first thing that comes to mind are dollar signs. What's the financial support for some of the resources that you're highlighting for the strategic plan? But there are also other forms of research. There's time. There's people. There are just other elements that are involved in that definition of resources. So as you go through your strategic plan, of course, look at the financial commitment that some of the plans may involve, but also really drill down to see who's involved and what other types of things outside of the financial support will be needed to have a, I would say, solid strategic plan and one that is actionable. So what I listed here are just some very common, and again, there could be some micro categories in here, but again, just very high level, some very common strategic planning phases. So the environmental scan is one that I'm very familiar with as being a former enrollment management professional. This is where you're not only looking internally to kind of gather data and understand your place in the higher ed landscape, but you're also looking externally to kind of understand and be realistic about who you're competing against, who do you see as your peers, aspirant institutions, those institutions that you, again, going back to that previous slide where we were talking about vision, these are institutions that you kind of highlighted based on your own research that you aspire to become in terms of some element that those institutions have. Again, because your mission, you're not necessarily replicating other institutions, but there could be facets in terms of student achievement. There could be financial resources. It could be other things that you're using to categorize why those institutions are aspirational. So that's the first thing. And this is an honest review and look at the environmental scan to kind of set the stage for some of the other elements. We've already talked about stakeholder engagement. This is really, once the data is accumulated and analyzed, that it's shared with the community, and there's some feedback that's given. Because again, your community is diverse, so you have different lenses or different perspectives that each of those groups can provide that really make up, what your institution's all about. So it's very important to have that stakeholder engagement. And even though it's number two, I think it's really aligned with everything else that kind of goes along that I'm going to talk about because it's not like you just have the stakeholder engagement in the beginning and don't go back. There's a lot of using their input, doing things, or executing some strategies and coming back as well. But with that said, at some point, with all the feedback you get, you have to define your strategic priorities. Again, knowing resources, knowing all the things that we just talked about in the previous slide, it's very important to be realistic about what you can do, and then, of course, determining the time span of your strategic plan. So defining what those priorities are, and again, getting feedback and support from those stakeholders that we had just talked about, it's very important. Now, SMART objectives are really important because it kind of defines what you're looking for and the measurable outcomes. And it's basically highlighting what those priorities are and then basically diving into those priorities and understanding the various steps that roll up to completing those priorities. I always find it's easier to kind of say where you want to end up and then basically do a reverse roadmap of what are the things that you need to do and then putting time and resources to it in order to have those objectives kind of roll up to the priorities themselves. Resource alignment, again, once the objectives are kind of etched out, understanding what the resource commitment will be for each of those elements. And this happens in terms of the last step with monitoring, evaluation, continuous improvement. This is once things are executed, how do you continue to monitor the movement of your strategic plan? It will be quarterly, will it be in the middle of the year, annually? Deciding what those things are and having those results really kind of give you a sense of whether or not you're meeting those goals, or in some cases there could be some opportunities that may come up, or unfortunately some setbacks. And how do you make those adjustments to your strategic planning? So these are six very high level but very important phases of the strategic planning process. So here, I just wanted to, it's almost like when you have those cooking shows where they start off with all the ingredients, and then all of a sudden the meal is on the side. I'm sort of doing that in a presentation form. So what I did here is I basically put some sample strategic goals that I've seen over the years, not only here at Middle States, but through my time in higher ed. And they should all be somewhat familiar and maybe even generic at this point. But so taking enhancing student success and retention. I bet, without even trying hard, you can think of some metrics that kind of, support whether or not the enhancement took place. And that's, looking at retention rates, looking at graduation rates, and then even getting into your particular programs and all of those elements. So that is a very popular strategic plan goal. Advancing faculty research and innovation, again, that kind of speaks to the mission. If the mission is one that supports these elements, again, it aligns with the mission, and this becomes one of your strategic goals. Strengthening community engagement, this comes in various ways. I mentioned the 2-year or junior college model. There are 4-year schools that do that in the form of a community service or internships or some type of real world experiential experience that the community itself can provide in conjunction with the college. I probably should have highlighted this first because I think nowadays ensuring financial stability is extremely important of just making sure that you have the financial wherewithal to accomplish all the things that you want to do as a university. Very important. Sometimes that's looking at enrollment in a strategic way in terms of the investment. And of course, if you are doing things like tuition discounting, understanding how much you're willing to discount tuition in order to make your class. Also looking at bringing in new programs, like all these things, or just a couple examples of how you look at financial stability or sustainability, I should say. And then, of course, modernizing infrastructure and technology is a big one. And I think with COVID kind of interrupting everyone's lives roughly 5 years ago, there's even some different thought as it pertains to infrastructure. What we have found that because a number of institutions were, for lack of a better term, forced to go online. Once COVID lessened, there were a lot of colleges that had said, maybe our footprint is too large. We don't need as many additional locations or branch campuses because of the advent of online for our institution, and how do we enhance that? Or it could be looking at something as simple as a library. I'm dating myself, but when I was in college, the library was the only place that you can get information to do your research or your papers. So you basically had to leave your dormitory or your home, go to one building, spend 12, 14 hours doing that work. But then what we've seen over time with the advent of technology is that you don't necessarily have to physically go to the library. So libraries have changed now to be more of a meeting area where now you can bring food and drink in. When I was going to school, that was not allowed, and you would get into lots of trouble for bringing in a soda or a bag of chips. But now, when you go to libraries, it's a convening area. It's a lot of wonderful spaces for meeting because that still is very important, especially for collaborative projects. So thinking of modernizing your infrastructure and of course the technology, I think carries a different meaning from year to year because there's technology that makes itself available that kind of changes the way you think and you process. So this goes back to what I was saying before about having these points of time where you can actually analyze and pause and kind of understand what these goals are and where you're measuring them and seeing whether or not there are opportunities for you as well. So governance, honestly, a lot of things that I just talked about really don't work unless you have a strong governance system. And so, with what I put here on the screen, again, maybe echoing it to a group that's well versed in this area, but this talks to the leadership structure at your respective higher ed institutions and just understanding how they not only lead but how they go about making their decisions and again, putting the institution first through the lens of its mission. And the second bullet point just speaks to just some of the areas, academic, financial, and strategic oversight. And I think all those things have subtopics underneath them in terms of the types of things that a strong governance structure will support. And number three, or the third bullet point, in terms of transparency, shared governance, and responsiveness, I find this to be extremely important. The governance within a higher ed institution has to be collaborative. Of course, we know at the end of the day, there's a handful of individuals that will have to exercise some decision making after taking all that information in and feedback. But it should not be in a vacuum leadership where you have one or two individuals making these decisions without really having a good understanding of their constituency, and of course, emphasizing the shared governance piece. So here, I basically highlighted a very generic kind of hierarchy as it pertains to governance, and it's different for different institutions. It might be different names, but as I go through this, I'll just kind of give you a descriptor, and of course, you can fill in the appropriate name that you have based on maybe the structure that exists in your area. But first, board of trustees or governors, they basically have a legal fiduciary responsibility to the institution. In most cases, this entity oversees the president or the chancellor or whoever is basically heading the institution. So there's some accountability there. But the board of trustees, as they exist, or board of governors, they do not. And this is something I want to make sure it's very clear for the audience. The board of trustees is not involved in the day-to-day running of the institution, as that's the role of the president or the chancellor. So it's very important when institutions are looking at the composition of the board of trustees. What I have found, and this goes back to my own experience as being a board of trustee member at my alma mater, you want to have a diversity of thought, a diversity of experiences on the board. Of course, it's great to have board members that have, for lack of a better term, deep pockets that are able to provide financial contributions to the institution. That's very important. In my role, I was not one of those individuals. What I was able to provide was this perspective of just how other colleges are functioning, and I had obviously at that time, a role in enrollment management and marketing, so that was kind of my sweet spot. But as you start to look at the composition of board of trustees, you have to look at the needs of the institution and try to have your board kind of match, in terms of their composition, match some of those needs, and so that you have this balance on the board. Let us move on to the president and chancellor. This is based. Oh, sorry about that. This is basically the executive leadership of the institution, and just provides again that day-to-day management and of course the strategic implementation. Obviously, there's a lot of strategy that's being developed to run a university. Of course, the board is involved in that, but once it's approved and once everyone's on board with that strategic plan, it is up to the president or chancellor to execute, and they're held accountable. And so, in some cases, when there are reviews of the president, they have goals, and those goals could definitely be embedded into the strategic planning process and some of the things that are looking to be accomplished there, or it could be other elements as well. So again, it's very important to kind of see that difference between what the board does and what the president slash chancellor does, and just that accountability or checks and balances that are in place there. The provost or academic affairs obviously oversees all the elements of the academic side of the house. Um, the structures are different because sometimes you have a provost that has the ability to be kind of like president light, so to speak, or a chief operating officer. So you may see some models where the president is outward facing, working with the board, maybe doing a lot of fundraising or working with the government, depending on whether or not the institution is state run or even private. The government relations piece is a very big responsibility for presidents. But depending on the characteristics of that president, you may see in most cases where the provost is running kind of the transactional elements of the institution while the president does that external work. So those are just nuances as you kind of look at your institutions and you start to define what roles are. That in the majority of cases, provosts are looked at sometimes as when the president is not available, the go-to individual. As we work our way down, we also have deans or department chairs. And basically, as the provost is responsible for overseeing the academic strategy, the deans and the department chairs are really into the operational leadership of the academic units. And so it's basically taking, the goals and responsibilities that are set upon the strategic plan that are under the wing of the provost, and making sure by department or by school or however your organizational structures are, these deans or department chairs are basically carrying out, those operational elements. And I have here last the faculty senate and the student government. This is really kind of remnants of shared governance. So this is participatory governance and advocacy in these particular areas. This looks different in different places. I've been at institutions where not only did they have a faculty senate, student government, but they also had kind of administrators or those that were not in the category of students and faculty. So you'll see different flavors of this, and it just really depends on how institutions are built and some of the various groups that they have. But again, when you look at this whole slide, you see this kind of emphasis on making sure that there's alignment and there's defined responsibilities for each of these areas to carry out the plan, the strategic plan for the organization. And I would say here too, all of this really speaks to what we call the shared governance model. It's collaborative decision making. Again, going back to earlier slides. I mean, again, hopefully you're seeing the alignment. When I put this together, it was sort of looking at all three of these parts, but I realized that at the end there was definitely this emphasis on just being collaborative, of just knowing that your decisions impact the whole community, and the whole community should have some mechanism or process of just being a part of that decision-making process. Academic freedom and institutional integrity are extremely important to do the work on the academic side. And as I mentioned before, clear roles, open communication, and mutual respect. I think all these things have to be emphasized and defined so that everybody has a good sense of what their responsibilities are, and of course, most importantly, the accountability that you have as well. So with the role of accreditation, obviously that's my sweet spot because that's what I'm doing currently. Um, it's been a joy, mainly because of the fact that you come into an organization like Middle States with a very, I would say, narrow focus. The institutions that you've worked, and in my case, it was five, making some assumptions because you had the opportunity to work at five places, but walking into the virtual doors of Middle States, it's amazing because you start to kind of open up your worldview a lot because of the fact that each of the vice presidents, especially the ones that you'll meet today, we all have a portfolio. I have roughly 79 schools. I started off with, I believe, 94, 95, and you just see the wide variety of diversity in every way of these institutions. So my background was mostly four-year private. I did have the opportunity to work for SUNY, which is a State University of New York, which is a public institution. But in terms of me coming to Middle States, I had to learn more about the two-year space. I had to learn more about those institutions that are called for profits. So it's great to work for an organization like Middle States because in terms of our accreditation approach and philosophy, is that we're not prescriptive to say that Middle States require your mission to actually follow this line of thought, or you have to do things this way. What we do as a accrediting body is really starting with the mission and really understanding exactly what the school states as its mission and seeing how it really runs into every other standard that we have. And we have seven. And the first one does speak to mission and goals and just how all that's being reflected in every other element that we have. So as an accrediting body, I find that extremely joyful because of the fact that I'm not coming in with my clipboard of saying it has to match what we decide as a accrediting body, that we actually turn it the other way, where we're actually analyzing what institutions are stating as their mission goals, and just seeing how that kind of plays out in terms of their governance, how that plays out in terms of how they decide the usage of resources, how it reflects their curriculum. So it really becomes this wonderful learning experience. I would say more so in my first 2 years now because I've now become very familiar with the portfolio that I have. So now there's a different level of knowledge that I possessed than when I first started. But that to me was extremely refreshing as a higher ed professional to kind of open up my worldview and understanding the varied missions that institutions have and the very creative and strategic ways that they go about fulfilling them. So I would say that was a long-winded way of saying that's the first bullet point of just how we actually go through the evaluation process. We also too, when there's mention of a strategic plan, we're looking at that. We're analyzing and understanding the strategic plan itself and just how it ties into the mission, and just making sure that all institutions have some version of it. I've been at places where it's called something different, but I think the essence of a strategic plan is there, where it guides the direction of the institution. And so, as we look at evidence and when teams are doing their evaluation process, it's very important to kind of understand that as they go forward and seeing the rest of the standards that will be evaluated by the team. And of course, the board has to be engaged in this process as well. As I mentioned before, there's definitely I would say, a system of evaluation that typically happens where the board is using the strategic plan as a metric for the performance of the president. So again, we're looking at that as well, understanding how boards are engaged in the process and their roles, and just making sure they understand what they're responsible for, and in turn, looking for evidence that they're assessing themselves to make sure that they actually are effective in terms of the work that they're responsible for. So as I'm summarizing, and this is where hopefully you have a lot of good questions for me to address. The first bullet point I think is very obvious. Mission defines the identity and strategy that drives progress. So mission is extremely important to kind of understand, to basically guide all the actions that the institution is taking. We also are emphasizing how governance is important, because they are the stewards of making sure that the mission is being executed, being evaluated, being refreshed in some cases, and just having that strategic plan be evident in everything that they do. And again, the last bullet point again just speaks to just how all of this aligns, and how there has to be the support of the foundation of the mission kind of being first, and all the things emanating from that. So what I'll do now is just really get a sense of your questions now, and let me see if I can find the question button. Here it is. Okay. I am looking for questions here. There we go. Okay. Let us start with. Okay. Our first question, how can institutions balance long-term strategic goals with short-term operational demands? So this is a great question. So as I mentioned before, I kind of spoke to high-level strategic goal phases. I think one of the most important things is, as you are involved in a long-term strategic plan, that you actually drill down and you actually look at these kind of stair-step methods of how do you complete that long-term goal. And in my experience, there are a lot of short-term operational things that support the long-term goal. So it's just a matter of kind of starting first of where you want to end up, and then possibly working your way back to see, what are some of the things that can be done within 3 months, within 6 months, whatever time interval you have. But it definitely can be done. And I've seen many institutions kind of implement it where on a quarterly basis, there are some operational elements. Like for instance, and again, I'm diving back into my old world. So with admissions, there are ways to kind of keep focus on what the enrollment goals are at the end by providing the level of interest, and we call them inquiries, of the conversion of those inquiries to applications. Once the application's around, you're sharing with the board or leadership how many of those applications have been accepted. And then, of course, you kind of go from acceptance to those that have enrolled. So that is an operational timeline that's very tight, but it speaks to a long-term goal of enrollment growth or the quality of your students. So just to kind of wrap up there, it's a matter of just starting first with the larger goal and then working your way back, kind of reverse engineering of just what are the micro steps that support that goal. And then you'll probably see those operational tasks or responsibilities that roll up to the goal really make themselves apparent. All right. Next question. In our region, public institutions do not have a board of trustees. Is it necessary to have one? Can university councils fulfill that same function? Another great question. So, even within the United States, we do have what we call systems. I had mentioned the State University of New York, and there are others. But in some cases, the institutions themselves do not have a board of trustees. It's a larger entity that kind of works on that level for the institution. So, I think this is why I emphasize when I showed that model that it may vary depending on just what type of systems you have, but there should definitely be some interaction with whatever, if it's the university council or whatever you call that entity, of getting an understanding of their involvement in the process. And so they may not necessarily evaluate the president or chancellor, as I mentioned before, but there has to be some evaluation of that leader of the campus. And so it may be defined in another way. But there's definitely flexibility in that model. But I think the takeaways that you need to have some interaction with the governing board, whatever that is called. There should definitely be some evaluation of the leader of the institutions in some way. And of course, the other parts I think are fairly common. It might be again different roles, but you have those other elements that I mentioned before. Okay. The next question. Since resources are limited and strategic clarity matters, should a university's mission and vision strive to balance the traditional triad of teaching, research, and community service, or is it acceptable or even strategic to prioritize one or two of these areas? Another great question. So, the joy and challenge of a presentation like this is that I'm kind of aiming at the middle. It's definitely not customized for the every aspect that you're interacting, but I think what it does is it sparks a conversation. And so, so to your question, I don't necessarily say that all of those three things should be the end all be all. And I'm not even saying that there are other things that you may want to have to replace them. But as you work with your community and in deciding what these elements are, then it has to be agreed upon that these are the pieces that you want to focus in on. And then, of course, and through your mission, of course, and then that kind of sets the standard going forward. But those were examples that I kind of shared in a very generic way. I think it's really starting with your mission that will guide, what your priorities are, and then of course that really being the engine for your strategic planning. All right, let's go with this question. How can institutions measure and evaluate the success of their strategic plan in advancing their mission and contributing to the national priorities? So, so again, I think this is really kind of that piece that I was focusing in on, where once the plan is developed and these benchmarks are kind of laid out, you have to decide on the intervals where you're measuring. Are we meeting that goal? Are we have we accomplished that subtopic? So that is your measurement, and you'll have data to kind of lean on to. It's not a yes or no question. In some cases, it's yes, and then here's the data as to why we've met that goal, or no, here's the reason why that became a challenge for us, and here's what we're doing to overcome that challenge. Or we've decided that because of the environmental scan or because of some other data, that goal unfortunately won't be met. So there are definitely ways to do it. It's just a matter of, again, trying to understand the measurability of that particular goal, and just really just answering the question, did you meet it? And kind of adding the context to it so you can kind of build on that when you do your analysis. All right. What kind of strategies universities can do in enhancing student success and retention? So yeah, there are a lot of things. First off, I think the first analysis is understanding, what are some of the successes and challenges of your student success and retention programming. Of course, numbers show it. We have metrics in terms of who's leaving and who's not. There's student surveys that you can do to kind of understand what the institution is doing right or wrong. Of course, involving the faculty to get their perspective on how students are engaged in the classroom, the overall support of students. So if you have I would say this is when I say supportive students, I'm really focusing now on the support of students outside the classroom. Are there extracurricular activities that are given to students to kind of enhance their interactivity with other students or other individuals at the school to engage them? Are there support mechanisms, in terms of your health services or other things that really kind of speak to just the students' mental and physical state. So there are definitely a number of ways that you can measure that. But I think the first thing is just really understanding what do you have now, getting understanding of how your student retention and success program is being analyzed in terms of your student feedback and just the things you have and kind of building from that. All right. What mechanisms can be used to align departmental plans with the university-wide strategic plan and a decentralized governance model? Wow. I would say that uniformly, you have to have an understanding of what the strategic plans and the priorities are. And honestly, to me, that guides the uniqueness and the alignment of the departmental plans. You just don't want to have departmental plans that are kind of way outside the bounds of what the institution is really aiming for. Because again, resources, I think, around the country and around the world are not plentiful. So you just don't want to have wasted effort and energy that doesn't really kind of roll up to the strategic plan. But the way that we actually do it at Middle States is that we do want to see, that kind of institutional effectiveness of having departmental unit goals kind of roll up to the strategic plan. So there has to be alignment, which is again a word I've used a lot today, of just making sure that there's not wasted effort. Now, again, departments are different. So we could be talking about academic departments, we could be talking about non-academic. So I think that's where, again, it gets into the level of detail that I'm probably not able to get into for this presentation, but I just want to emphasize the fact that regardless if you're kind of on one side or the other, it really does have to align with what the institution is looking at as a strategic goal. Now, as a departmental member, and you see like a glaring need for something, then that's where that communication collaboration happens. Where there may because you're an expert or you're kind of on the ground in that particular area, for whatever reason that's being missed in the discussions around strategic planning. That's where again you have to kind of speak up and really speak to your leadership to kind of make the case as to why this should be something that should be rolled into the strategic planning process. Let's see here. We have 5 minutes, but time goes by quickly when you're having fun. But we'll try to knock out some more of these questions. Let's see here. All right, this is going to be a good one, and I'm gonna read it, not knowing how I'm going to answer it. So this should be fun. Um, with the rapid advancement of artificial intelligence technologies, how can institutions ethically integrate artificial intelligence into administrative processes? Have there been any changes or development in institutional policies or requirements regarding the governance and ethical use of artificial intelligence? So again, I kind of predicted the future. I may not have the answer to this, but we can talk it out. So we definitely know as a accrediting body, and again, those in higher ed, that AI has made itself very present. I would say some of the forward-thinking institutions have come up with just ways to understand it and to manage it, and not necessarily ban it. And so the institutions that I've come across, and again, they're at the nascent stages of building their policy. They see the benefit of AI, when it's used within a certain confine. I know that there are classes where professors are basically embracing it and saying you can use AI, but these are the parameters. So I think some of it at a very baseline is understanding where do you see AI being prevalent, and then how do you kind of give some guidelines or just kind of draw some fences around how it can be used and how it shouldn't be used. I would say from an operational standpoint, the most important thing that I would emphasize, and we've had some internal discussions about this at Middle States, is that AI as it exists now is an open system. So you're putting information, again, especially if you're your own organization or institution, you're putting information that's out there for the world, and it being processed, in a way that you probably don't want to have. I would say the more productive way to consider AI institutionally is to build closed systems because think about the operational enhancements you'll have where if it is closed and protected and there are ways that your intellectual property is not out floating out in the world, how quickly you can get things analyzed. I'm thinking internally for our group, if you are looking for a certain policy and when it was used last, if we had a system that was again closed and secure, that we're able to find that as opposed to doing the manual looking at reviews or looking through our documents to kind of find that thing. That's where you see the use of AI being extremely useful and efficient, for institutions. So I would say that as I'm sort of answering this question, that I find that AI is definitely a useful tool when it's managed correctly, when there's policies and procedures around it, and again, when it's embraced in terms of the advantages it could have when it comes to professors in the classroom and projects that they have where they're actually sharing with students some of the positive uses of artificial intelligence. All right, let us look for one more question. All right, this is a good one. And unfortunately, this will most likely be our last question, but it's a good question to end on. This individual said, how can the mission be used as a guiding framework during times of institutional change or crisis? So I've always been, a proponent of a mission being basically the stalwart of an organization. So things can swirl around, things can move, but the mission is what it's the calm in the storm. So it kind of allows for an institution to kind of stop and pause and do a check and say, as we go through all of these changes, are we staying true to our mission? And in some cases, there could be the discussion that the mission itself may not be appropriate for that time and place, but that is a very intense conversation that needs to be had whenever you're looking at changing some elements of your mission. But in most cases, it's the calm of the storm. It allows you to kind of reset, to focus, and just say, based on our mission, does this align? Is this something that's making us drift away from what we're known for, what we've always been about, what has grounded us, or not? And so it's a very tough discussion to have, but I still feel that in most cases the mission is a great way to reset, to kind of understand, how far are you moving away from with all the institutional change or different opportunities you have out there. So the clock has turned to 45 after the hour, and I will first off, I want to thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak with you this morning. Great questions, and just really enjoyed the experience that I've had today with you. Good luck, and hopefully I will see you soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, friends. The session will continue. The video will continue to record. If our attendees can take a break for 15 minutes and return to the session on a clock hours. Thank you very much.
Thank you.